Welcome to Plenty. Today, we're doing something super unusual, which is that we are posting here an episode of a podcast that I was on with one of my best friends in the world, Sarah Tacy Tangretti. So, Sarah is our resident nervous system healing expert within Relaxed Money. And she recently had me on her show, Threshold Moments, to talk about healing our relationship with money in relationship to the nervous system. So much of what I know about the nervous system is because of my relationship with Sarah. And honestly, the conversation was so good and so illustrative of why she's a teacher inside our program that I asked her if we could publish this episode here on Plenty as well. And she said yes. In this episode, she asks me questions about some of the hardest moments in my life in the last 5 years. And because she's one of my best friends, the conversation is a different kind of conversation than you might get otherwise. And that's why I wanted to share it with you today. So enjoy the deep dive, enjoy the deeper learning about the nervous system and money. And here's the episode. Welcome to Plenty. I'm your host, Kate Northrup, and together we are going on a journey to help you have an incredible relationship with money, time, and energy, and to have abundance on every possible level. Every week, we're going to dive in with experts and insights to help you unlock a life of plenty. Let's go fill our cups.
Please note that the opinions and perspectives of the guests on the Plenty podcast are not necessarily reflective of the opinions and perspectives of Kate Northrup or anyone who works within the Kate Northrup brand.
I'm just going to take a moment, speaking out loud, feet on the ground. Welcome to Threshold Moments. Today we have with us Kate Northrup. This is the first time I've had someone on for the second time.
Whoa, I'm so honored.
And it's not because there are a shortage of amazing people to talk to, but I feel like since we last talked, so much has happened. And there's a launch of a new program that I want to talk about. And I feel like this threshold that we would talk about would be about the threshold between scarcity and plenty. You know, when we're not recording together, I'll do your bio. I usually do a bio at the beginning, but I feel like
That's great.
this.
Let's just go in.
Yeah, we're just going to go in. And I know you've told this story probably a number of times of the time in your life where you began to switch your mindset from scarcity, from like, I am responsible for creating content that will be supportive to my family, supportive to all my employees. I am a mom, I am a wife, and like feeling the stacking and layering and possibly looking for an external number that could make you feel safe. And I'm wondering if you could speak to us about your process of shifting from the inside of you before waiting for the outside. We're just really jumping.
Totally. No, I mean, this is great. This is all that matters. So, it's funny, as you ask this question, as I told you before we started recording, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So I'm going to tell a story, and then I'm going to tell two different stories. Well, sort of, it's a three-parter. It's all the same story that answers this question. And then I would love to hear you explain from a nervous system perspective in your language, which is a little bit different than my nervous system language, what was going on there, because I have an understanding of it, but I also want to learn from you. And I think it's illustrative for listeners of what is going on when we think it's just like, there's not enough money. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. And so today in this story, and then maybe with some of Sarah's reflection, we can help you identify who are listening. What's the difference between when there's actually just not enough money or when I'm stuck in a loop of scarcity? So, okay. Knowing that that's a spectrum and there's like a lot of gray area there. Okay. So what happened was I left Maine sort of unexpectedly. And when we got to Florida in early 2021, my husband, Mike, became incredibly ill very fast with a repeat of an illness that he had been struggling with for the past 2.5, almost 3 years, called topical steroid withdrawal, TSW, and also steroid withdrawal. It's also called red man syndrome. So if anybody has that or wants to look it up, you can check that out. It's awful. And it's somewhat mysterious because it's not like you go to the doctor and there's a diagnosis and there's a clear protocol. Like when you go to the doctor and you have this, they suggest that they're going to prescribe steroids, and it is infuriating. So it's like the toxic loop of our medical system that was not helping us. And so there we were. We had moved to Miami somewhat unexpectedly to help Mike heal because of the weather and the humidity, and it was better for his skin. And we were paying for 2 lives. Suddenly we had this full life in Maine, and then now we had another extra life in Miami, in one of the most expensive cities in the country. And suddenly, like, private school tuition and blah, 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 blah. And my husband was really sick, and I had a 2.5-year-old, almost 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old, 4 or 5, somewhere in there. And then also our team, and I was like primary parent, primary breadwinner, leading this company, and it just felt like too much. And I was in a loop, and that loop that you mentioned, Sarah, was, okay, if Mike could just get better and make money, everything would be fixed. So we had a session with our therapist, David, who's very thematically tuned in, and he also does a lot of internal family systems parts work. And David was like, okay, Kate, go inside and imagine that Mike, like, close your eyes and imagine that Mike has walked in the door and he said, babe, I just made $10 million. So now you do not need to work. In fact, we could close the business, like whatever you want. And so I had expected a particular response to that information, but the response that I received from inside myself was shocking, which is that I instantly felt kind of flatlined and depressed and dead inside. And I was disturbed by that because what it helped me to realize was that I had been operating using stress and pressure as a stimulant. And what I now know about the nervous system that I was learning at the time was that basically my nervous system was developed in an environment where it received the message, what it means to be alive is to feel a constant uh, level of stress and pressure. Like, being alive means stress and pressure. And so I was finding any opportunity to manufacture stress and pressure, and I didn't even know I was doing it. And I was in that moment projecting into this fantasy future that I thought would fix everything, and realizing that actually my body was addicted to the stress and the pressure. So I'm going to stop there, and I want to know from you, like, what other layers are going on there in the nervous system? And then I'll tell you what I did about it. Because what I did about it is not make more money. And also, Mike didn't overnight make 10 million. That's not what fixed it.
I mean, I don't see parts of your story where you're like, oh, there's a gap. She's totally missing this piece of the story. I'm hearing it. I'm like, wow, you hear that so clearly. I imagine if I heard like someone's going to make $10 million, I imagine that I would feel relaxed. And,
Mhm.
and I'm going to share this. I'm not sure I've shared this out loud before. When I started dating Steve, I always was looking at like, do I have any hidden agendas?
Mm.
Is it attractive to me that he someday is going to be a dentist? And another part that actually showed up was like, I was scared shitless that if he became a dentist and was out earning me, then my work wouldn't matter and that I wouldn't be able to do my work. I'm sorry, I totally just switched from you to me. That I wouldn't be able to do my work because if the amount of money I made with it didn't make a difference to our family's well-being, then my work no longer mattered. So I had an overcoupling of the amount I make and my worth. And when I first heard your story, I also wondered if there was an overcoupling of your worth and how much you make or produce or how successful you are. So I was wondering
Okay.
when I
That is
first heard
so
that.
a missing piece.
Okay.
And that's been coming up in our relaxed money coaching sessions. And it's been coming up everywhere. And
Mm,
so it's so interesting that it's coming up again. And it's because it's something that I'm so aware of is happening with other people. And I don't think I saw the thread that it was happening in this scenario. So in addition to, kind of the nervous system soup that my body developed in, not only was it stress and pressure, uh, financially, but just like general stress and pressure. It was also a lot of stress and pressure around performance, specifically academic performance. So I think that overcoupling of our inherent worth
mm,
with our earnings or with our performance or with our achievement is something to really dial into. And it's again, like it's a system pattern. So thank you for saying that. I think that's really profound and it adds in. I knew there was going to be an added layer. So then I had this other coach because it takes a village and we have like a couples one, we have a personal one. And I was in this like massive, it felt like a crazy financial contraction. I was like, I'm paying for these two lives. Da, 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 da. My husband's like, like contraction, contraction, contraction. It felt so squeezy. But I had shared with her about the like flatlining with imagining that Mike had brought home, a whole bunch of money. And so she suggested an exercise that I do, like an experiment. And we came up with it together. And she said, okay, so what's an amount of money that you would feel comfortable either going into your savings or going into the hole, like going into debt or a credit line or whatever, that you just know because of past experience and your capability as a business owner that you could just make back if you needed to relatively quickly. And I was like, okay, well, I know that number. So I decided that I would either get to that amount of money of overspending, like high, more than our income, or 90 days. So one or the other, whichever I hit first, 90 days or this amount of money in the hole. And until that time, I was going to just practice what it would be like to relax, even though I didn't have good evidence that it was a good time to do so. And by relax, what that meant for me was to not mount like a new marketing campaign to come up with more income. Cause that was always my old behavior. It was like, let me ramp up and get something going to create money, which I can totally do. And many entrepreneurs know how to do that. But it was from an originating point of stress and pressure, as opposed to from a place of like pleasure and joy and surrender and trust. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to do that behavior. And I just, I did a lot of like watching TV in the middle of the day and laying in bed crying. I had so much emotion that needed to be felt. So when I say relaxation, it wasn't like it wasn't really a joyful time. I'll be perfectly honest. It was like a really sad time. Um, and I would be interested to hear about that also from his perspective. But what ended up happening in the 3D reality is that we didn't go into the hole at all. We actually hit all of our financial goals and I didn't have to like ramp up to do something extra. I just kept doing the things we had already agreed to do, and delivering on what we had already decided to offer. And we made enough money. And it was a freaking revelation of like, wait a second, I didn't have to ramp up in order for this to happen. I didn't have to clench a certain amount for there to be abundance. The abundance was there when I relaxed.
mm.
And then within that 90 days, Mike fell off his bike and broke his knee. So then he couldn't walk also. And that was just like, okay, great. So the stakes are now higher. Um, how are you gonna relax now? And I was like, yes. And then 18 months later, something happened behind the scenes in my company where a lot of our team, like the goddess basically came in and had heard a request that I had had, and she just facilitated it happening in a way that felt really hard. So we had massive team changes going on. We were working with basically it was like me and Mike and one other part-time person. And we were going to do this launch of our first round of Relaxed Money. And a week before we were starting promotion, Mike got hit by a car.
Ugh.
And he, while he was riding his bike, and had a massive traumatic fracture to the same knee he had broken 18 months before. So he had to have a week in the hospital, 2 surgeries, and he was on crutches for 3 months. And so then again, it was like, hey, so you going to relax now? And I was like, yes, yes, I am. And so we delayed the launch because, our family was kind of like hanging on by a thread. And it wasn't like we had all this extra where it was like, oh, great, I can just delay this launch, infinitely and we'll be fine. Like my company is the way that my family eats and that our team gets paid. There's not there isn't really plan B in our lives. Like this is the plan. And so it requires a great level of trusting in that. Relaxation required me to tap into something so much bigger than spreadsheets and emergency funds, and really to tap into source with a capital S, and heal some patterning. And then in the end, that launch of Relax Money, the first time out of the gate, was our biggest launch we've ever had. It blew my mind. It went so well, and it was so easy in flow. I was just checking behind my computer, what is happening? And the only thing I can say is money really responds to relaxation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I can imagine so many listeners go, my experience is that money responds to hustle. And so what I imagine is that when you slow down, like we switch the word to slow down, instead of relaxed,
Love it.
um, many people feel like they're going to die.
Mm.
I
Yes.
felt that way for if I go this slow, will I survive? Because the way I found success in the past was to be tenacious,
Yes.
was to just keep going. And there's something probably like you said that my system gets addicted. Like I can feel it during the day if I get into the mode of if I check off all these to-dos, then I can relax. Like I can still get into that mode and I can feel it. And so to say that there's a possibility of another way is a great leap that you don't necessarily have a ton of proof. And the universe keeps giving you examples of actually it's less safe than you think. And if I were to describe what I think happens in the nervous system is that when we move from familiar to optimal, I've said this a few times on the podcast. So for some listeners, you've heard this before, that all of our cells have receptor cells and they're all waiting for these ligands to make a connection. And
What
they
are they called?
ligands.
Ligands. I'm just taking notes.
Yeah. So this is the work of Candace Pert, and
Oh, she's so amazing.
she's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Her work is fascinating. And so the images I get from this is like you learn how to salsa together. Like you learn a specific dance that these two do together. And when on a cellular level you decide to change, now the emotional peptide, the ligand, has nothing to connect to and it feels like abandonment,
Mm.
right? Like you're left dancing on the dance floor by yourself. And there's no one to say like, oh, this is the thing that generally makes you feel good. This is the connection that makes you feel good. And so there has to be, I am borrowing the term the tension field from biodynamic craniosacral therapy. And I may slightly be misusing it, but this idea of hanging out in a field of a new possibility before before a matching ligand meets you, before someone comes out to like
And
dance.
it's literally like being the first person on the dance floor at a wedding where you just have to like awkwardly just be there until the one person joins and then the two people, and then suddenly it's a dance party. But it is uncomfortable.
And so it takes resourcing, right? So the
Yes.
definition of if a definition of stress that I heard from Jerry Molitor is that stress is when we have more demands than resources, then when you're going through something and you know you're going into a tension field, you know that you're trying to do a new pattern, then you're gonna want to say, like, what resources do I have? So clearly at this time, Mike is out, you have more demands with your kids, and you could see that you have more demands with work, but you're now looking at like, well, I have this therapist, I am doing this nervous system work, I am utilizing these things to help me at a time where I feel like I might die if I try this new pattern. Because when people talk about like, I changed on a cellular level, you did.
I did.
You did. You literally, your cells shifted, and then you're waiting for your chemistry. You're going through a withdrawal and you're waiting for your
Yes.
chemistry to meet it.
Oh my God. It's
Then,
so true.
yeah, it's
I,
like,
I'm just over here like taking copious notes because that's exactly what it felt like. And when you said the resourcing piece, so one of my main regulation practices and practices of resourcing is communing with nature. And at the time, I was living on the 41st floor of a high rise. And so I didn't feel like, amongst a lot of other tall buildings, in like streets where there was a lot of trash. And coming from a fairly woodsy area in Maine, like it just felt like sort of an assault on my system. And when I would do like a grounding meditation, it's like drop the grounding cord, and I could just sort of like feel my grounding cord like dangling around the 20th floor, like it couldn't make it all the way down. So what I would do is I would go downstairs, even if I only had 10 minutes. I would go downstairs, which took forever in the elevator, and I would walk out to the waterfront, which had this kind of like, sidewalk along it. And I would just sit on the wall, on the water wall thing, and just look at the ocean and allow my body to receive the energy of the ocean. And I know that that's probably, for some people, they're like, how do you do that? And for me, it's a little hard to describe. So maybe you have better language for it, but it's literally just kind of like attuning my energy to the ocean. It's like I'm feeling the ocean's frequency and then just like letting it come into my body.
it reminds me a little bit of the exercise we did with your mastermind when we asked the outside person in a partnership to resource from something greater than themselves, so that when you're a mother or you're a business person, if you're pulling from your own well all the time, that it could feel like too much. So we were also looking out at the ocean then. Could we look at the ocean and could we start to attune to the ocean and imagine her energy as this wellspring as we sit and listen to this person's story, not to heal them, not to just like, but could we be resourced from another place instead of thinking that we're the battery for somebody else? And the another thing that might be helpful for listeners is that oftentimes when we look out to nature, what happens is that our head moves back in space. So if you imagine like the back side of your ears, not the behind part, but the furthest back, that starts to move back and our gaze starts to go more peripheral. And when that happens, our breath pattern changes. It becomes more uh, like it spreads throughout the entire body, the front, back, up, down, and the nervous system then thinks it's safe,
Mm,
right? When we're like fleeing something, we get like more directed, our head goes forward. And when we look at the setting sun, when we look at a mountain range, our head shifts back, our breath pattern changes without trying to. And we
mm,
start to attune to the pace of nature because our body is nature. So our
mhm,
body gets in tune with itself.
mm. It makes me want to cry. So good.
Ah,
So
nature.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I mean, that's the most practical thing I can say I would do. I would just, and then I would also just ask the ocean if she had anything to tell me. And then I would listen.
Mm,
And I don't really remember exactly like what the messages were, but they were often marketing questions.
I love that.
I would just like go sort of ask Mother Nature what she thought I should do about like our various marketing strategies. And it was very clarifying. So that's kind of how I shifted on a cellular level, the very way you described. But I want to go back to that part where we feel like we're going to die when we change a pattern.
Yeah.
That was the I remember our mutual friend Eliza, who's been on the podcast, and her episode was wonderful. Excuse me. Um, she one day called me on FaceTime just checking in, and I was really in it, and I was just like, everything felt so sad. I was just in a lot of grief and I couldn't stop crying. And she was like, "It makes sense that you are crying because there's a part of you that's dying, and you're just doing such a beautiful job dying."
Mm,
And she
I
just
love
sat
that.
on FaceTime with me while I cried, and we just kind of cried together. And it literally felt like, and there were so many layers for me at that time around identity and moving from this small town where I'd grown up and family stuff. Um, and it really was like certainly an ego death, but then also just a dying of old ways. And it was really painful. So, but so worth it because when we do that, when we go out in the field and wait while we feel like we're gonna die for the new ligand to show up, like, I love that. So good.
We call that a molecule of emotion if
Yes,
anyone really, like, hold on to what the ligand is, yeah.
exactly. And what happens is, like, I do this thing when I'm trying something new or like wanting to do something that makes me uncomfortable that requires a new part of myself, whether it's, sitting down to work on my book proposal, or yesterday I was doing an arm workout, and it's what you teach about titration. It's like, okay, I can stay 3 more minutes. Like, I can stay 3 more minutes, and then after that, if I want to check my phone, I can do that. If I want to just like not do the last set, I can do that. Inevitably for me, usually after 3 minutes, I'm like, well, I can stay for 5 minutes. And or maybe sometimes I don't. And so that ability, like, it doesn't have to be, you come from a hardcore athletics background. I come from this like really intense academic background. And then we both have all this achievement stuff. So it's really like what we were taught, or what I was taught, is that you just have to push through and have grit. And so I want to highlight that standing in the field, changing the pattern, feeling like you're going to die is not the same thing as pushing past your comfort zone and just overpowering your boundaries to change. It's actually, for me, it's like doing small doable parts. So it was like, during that time of my life, I also felt really angry. So I felt a lot of sadness and I felt a lot of grief. So it was like, okay, I feel so angry right now. I can just go in the closet and for 30 seconds scream into a pillow. I don't have to, you know, like do anything more than that. Just something to relieve the energy, to move through an emotional stress loop, whatever it is. And so that feeling of I'm gonna die, it's not like we have to stay there forever. Like, we can stay there a little bit and then go find comfort or resourcing or whatever, right?
Yeah, and so I'm really loving that you brought up titration because our conversation could have sounded very all or nothing.
Mhm.
Leave the familiar. You must leave what feels safe and go die in the field until a new kid is born
Sounds
by
awful.
yourself. Yeah, it doesn't have to. And like, my voice just went really high. It doesn't have to. Uh, Titration is this idea of, oh, Bridget would say, like, I don't know that she would say this is a definition of titration, but she often says small, doable pieces over time.
Mm.
And the idea of pendulation, which we I'm going to say always, I try not to use the always, but very often use in somatic work is first we'll find health, right? Let's look for any piece of health,
Mm,
anything. And I think you have this in one of your nervous system support programs on Relax Money. Look for any part in your body that feels like stability, any part that
Yeah.
feels like health. And then we might pendulate to something that's challenging and we would put it in the company of health.
Mm,
So it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a death in the middle of the field by yourself.
right.
Point of getting resources would be that you were on the phone with Eliza.
Yeah.
There's this idea of creating conditions so that as the charge gets bigger, then we're able to stay with that higher charge when we've created more conditions in our life. And the conditions include pause, they include welcoming your anger and your grief, they include healthy friendships and
Mm,
boundaries and right relations. So there's a whole slew of things that falls under creating conditions. And on the other part of that three directions map, if we weren't able to complete that whole loop where we were out on the field, we have enough resources, we get to the new way of being, in between we get to soothe and distract. Like you said,
yeah.
like we can jump on the phone, we can maybe get out one more email than we thought we were going to.
Yeah.
It's like it gives a little bit of that old self, like, okay, I won't like scare you all the way. So we get to do it over time. And actually, if you don't mind me saying this, we can edit anything so you can tell me if it's okay to say this, is that somebody on one of the Relax Money calls, so everyone listening, once a month, I go on and I support the program and we do a nervous system support portion and it's an hour long. And at the end, they get to ask questions. And somebody asked a question. They were like really amazed of how, I don't remember the example, but it was a public example you gave of just saying like no to this really big deal and like choosing something else.
Yeah. I
And
remember
they
what
were
it was.
like,
I'm happy to
how?
share the story after.
Okay. So I'll just share it. Like they were like, I just, for them, it felt like I just don't know if I can do that. Like I don't know. Um, I'm even saying like, oh, is this okay for whoever's the share is just to say that much? And my response was that whenever you made that decision, whatever it was, there had been so many layers and times of practice before that. And although we have practice doing hard things, life generally gives us opportunities where they're like, oh, great job. Try this next one. But we've learned a bit more how to resource ourselves while we're doing those hard things. So it's not that it's easy and that we can some of them. So some of them are these quantum leap moments, but often because we've done so many small steps along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that so much. Okay. There's a couple layers there that I want to share, and it has to do with community. And then I have a couple of questions to ask you about how you lead those sessions in Relax Money, if that's okay. I mean,
Yeah,
I know we
sure.
basically like we were still talking about your first question, but I think that's all we're doing.
Yes, great. I know I had like 20 more. I was like, well, this is
Sure
just
you
we're
did.
talking about it. But actually, so I want you to say those layers. Before you say the layers, I want to highlight something that I don't want to get missed
Great.
from what's happened so far. What has happened so far is that maybe we'll get to double binds. I hope we get to double binds. But
Mm,
what's happened so far is Kate has outlined that in real time in the 3D world, there are real things that feel like they could be threatening or are threatening or are pressures. So I think often from the outside, one could look, and not because you're not real on your Instagram account or on like any, like, it's like, I think you do a great job of showing yourself. And somebody could look and go like, well, that's nice because X, Y, and Z, like because she can, because X, Y, and Z. And so easily can assume that nothing was real. And so what I do want listeners to hear is like, there was a lot real. There were a lot of real things going on when you started making the small doable changes. Like some of them were big leap and some of them are small doable changes to say, I'm going to try on this new way of being. I want to see what's possible. So I just want the listener to hear that if you're listening and you're like, well, that's nice, but I have rent to pay. It's also not that Kate's path is the same path for you, but it can be the inquiry of, Are there any areas I can relax? And then maybe Kate can even say a little bit about her program after this. Um, and we changed the word for a second from relax to
Slow down.
down. And Eliza Reynolds will often, or the name she's going.
Alloway.
Well, I don't know. Does she do that?
She did. She sent out an email.
Okay, it's public.
Yeah,
I'm
it's public.
I'm like, did I not? Eliza Alloway. She'll say layers of comfort.
Layers
Which
of comfort.
kind of works in this and kind of doesn't, but if we
Well, I mean, I even think about like this one pair of overalls that I wore like almost every day at that time. and and the way in which like they really were comforting on my body, and I hadn't worn overalls regularly since I was 12. And there was something about these overalls that were like really essential
yeah.
in terms of like a physical feeling of layers of comfort.
So it was because I was thinking when you're breaking a habit, we're not looking for the comfort, but we are then creating a resource of comfort
Exactly.
for us in the
Right.
situation.
Right. Like wearing a pair of overalls, which is definitely not doing any harm to anybody or anything or myself.
Yeah.
Right. So
Okay.
so beautiful. Okay. So I definitely want to get to double binds next. So let's go there next. So, but I just want to say about that particular instance, because I'm sure that folks listening have these desires to like expand and go for bigger things and have, a life that continues to get even more beautiful and more luscious, right? And so at that particular time when I said no, it was a big speaking gig with like some of my most favorite authors and, really fancy people who would be like a dream to be on a headline thingy with. But it was just like far away and I was nursing and it was like, if I say yes to this, I will be sacrificing things that are more important, like my physical health and my kids. And Mike was so sick at the time. This was the first time he was sick. And I was just like, my family doesn't have the resources to actually handle this. Yes. So I said no. And I wanted to say, and then in the end, I ended up getting invited on a really big podcast that was happening at the time I would have been at that speaking gig that definitely reached way more people than I would have at the speaking gig because it's like virtual and it's like hundreds of thousands of people. And it took an hour and I could do it, in my jammies. So that was just a perfect example of like, it's okay to say no to the big shiny thing. It doesn't mean that was the only opportunity. Like there's an infinite number of opportunities and they're just going to keep coming. And that's one of the ways I tap into plenty is just really knowing that truth. But so in terms of in terms of community and being able to resource from what's possible for other people, I grew up in a household with a mom who has a very similar career or had, to what I do. And I saw her say no to fancy stuff. And I saw her not die. And I saw her prioritize our well-being and her well-being and not get caught up in the FOMO of like, I have to chase every little thing. And so that was such I think we talk, or at least I talk a lot about unhealthy nervous system imprints. And I wanted to highlight that the nervous system receives information about things that are threats and things that are really beautiful. And so that's a nervous system imprint I have of a feeling of safety and trust that like, we don't have to chase the shiny object. Stuff will come to us in right timing. And that's why it's so important to spend time in healthy community, healthy, safe community, like the things that you offer, like relaxed money, like other things that are around, so that we can co-regulate and get new, healthier nervous system imprints from other people who are having a lived reality of what we desire, because by being around them, our nervous system recognizes like, A, that's possible, and B, it's safe because look, they're right here. And our bodies don't believe the lie of separation. They actually know that we are all waves in the same ocean. Our mirror neurons can't tell the difference between if it's happening to Sarah or if it's happening to me. And so the lie of separation tells us that like, oh, must be nice for you. And the truth of our unity and our deep, deep connection will say like, oh, because that's happening for her on some level, that actually is happening for me. And when we embrace it that way, we actually do heal our nervous systems and upgrade their settings.
So what I would offer to listeners here if that still feels impossible in any way, like where you looked at something and said like, I hear that, but I still feel like um, she could do that because she has this degree or because she has this or that. Um, I would offer the may I show me the reticular activation tool right here to say, show me how so of course like what you're saying is like the community is offering that vision. If someone said like show me what it looks like to have trust in the universe, to know that I'm not the only one trying to get this program done. Show me that I can lean into something greater than myself. And then I feel like when somebody sees you doing it or sees someone else doing it, it feels like proof of the question they asked. And if we ever look at someone and say, well, they can do that because of X, Y, and Z, I might say, I really love what they have. Show me in what way that's possible for me. Show me how it aligns with me. Not just like I don't to become them, but like how does that align with me and what will my path be there? Show me my path. And then in
Mhm.
that way, we stop saying like, well, they can do that because they were a D1 athlete, so they have the tenacity. They can do that because they went to an Ivy League school. They can do that because we could start saying, cool, they did it and they have these things. Show me my way there.
Show me my
Show
way.
me my way there. And that way we can kind of take the comparison out a little bit and keep the inspiration and keep the curiosity. And then the brain will actually start seeing what it was missing before.
Ugh,
I'm gonna use
so
that for myself.
good. So good. Okay, what did you wanna say about double binds? I wanna make sure we go there.
Oh, I actually kind of wanted to ask you this. And so this month I want to do a podcast on double binds and sacred thirds. And so if I were to describe to you a double bind, it would be I must, I can't. I must make more money, I can't make more money. And there could be a whole story behind it. I
Mhm.
must relax, I can't relax, right? Like yours might be like, I must relax in order to heal my nervous system, in order to be magnetic for money. I can't relax. My husband is super sick. I'm a mom of two. I need to pay the bills. So a double bind is I must, I can't. And the sacred third is when we begin to look at the nuance of the two. So if you're listening, I have my two fists together and I'll do a whole podcast on this and we'll do one with like parenting and finances and I was wondering if you could do one on finances. So I'll just
Mhm.
um can I use the ruby one that we talked about?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like this is actually I could use my own. I'm going to use my own child because this
Okay.
recently happened. Um, we made this reservation to go out to dinner. We let go of our childcare help. Our friend said, like, we'll take your kids. My older one was like, I'm not going. And a whole panic pack ensued. And she really wanted to go to dinner with us. And we're like, we had waited, like, we hadn't seen these people in 5 years. It was a super fancy place. There were only 4 seats. There was no room for a fifth seat. It was not a kid's place. But eventually, like when I look at the must, I can't, like, we must go to dinner. I can't go to dinner now because she could like, and back and forth. I was like, you know what? Sure. If you want to split a seat with dad and I, and like,
Mm.
it was just like Sienna, my youngest one went to go play with her friends next door. And I don't know if this makes sense, but as we looked at it, it wasn't like, no, you absolutely can't come to dinner.
Right.
Cause the thing is, you open up one hand and you look at it like, okay, she can't come to dinner. But she can't stay here. I must like, and you keep looking back and forth. And it's like, can she really not come to dinner?
Right.
Under what conditions would it be okay? And so I was like, great. Like, if you're willing to like bring your coloring pad and pencils and know that it's going to be like possibly not. And she was just like, it was so relaxing for her to sit in between
Mhm.
Steve and I. Like, that is
Mhm.
her home base. And as
Mhm.
soon as she had that option, her whole body relaxed. Steve and I got to do what we wanted to do. Like everyone, it was a win win win. And so, one of the primary things in the alchemical alignment is that we'd love for situations to come out to a win-win. And so when we look at a double bind and we start looking at nuances, sometimes there's this sacred third in the middle that seems impossible when you're stressed
Yeah.
over the two.
Yes.
So I think you kind of described it already, but I'm wondering if you can think of something from relaxed money, like an example in relaxed money where there's a double bind and how relaxed money might help you find a sacred third.
Yeah. Okay. I love this. So, one of the things that you taught me is that when we're in either or thinking, we are in it. trauma response. So when we're in a double bind, we can know like, oh, we're dysregulated. There is a part of me that feels a threat. And now I'm outside my range of resonance, my range of capacity. And so just knowing that really helps because it's incredibly rare that there's actually only two options. Like it just really is. Like we can always find a way. And so nuance requires regulation. And what I know is that when we are dysregulated, when we are sensing a threat, there's less cerebrospinal fluid that flows from our bodies to our brain. There's less oxygen that flows to our brain. The left and right hemispheres are not talking to each other. And we're literally just accessing less of our capability for problem solving or seeing possibility. Our literal peripheral vision shortens, narrows, and so also does our energetic peripheral vision. Our ability to see possibility goes away. And so in those moments, like, I must provide for my children. I must, let's pretend. I mean, I think my example is a pretty good one of like, so also at that part, I didn't tell this story. I didn't add to the story that my doctor, I just had my blood work done. And my doctor basically was like, based on your hormonal panel, your brakes are broken. And also so is your gas. And if you keep going like this, you're going to get really sick. And so I was also like, okay, I must take care of my body because my children cannot have two sick parents. Because then like we're totally effed. So it really did feel like I must slow down. I can't because I have to make money for the family. And so what the mindset world would have us do is change our thoughts. But the thing is, when our bodies are in a sympathetic response and they feel unsafe, a better feeling thought is generally not available. Or if we can even think of it, it feels like a lie. And our bodies know we're lying. And so it just doesn't work. Like you cannot think your way out of a way that your body feels. And so in Relaxed Money, we practice, first of all, we learn all the anatomy of the nervous system, how to know when you're dysregulated, and many, many different ways to find yourself back in a sense of safety and how to plug into source with a capital S, which is what you described with resourcing, layers of comfort, pendulation, titration. All of these things are ways that we can plug into source with a capital S. And our best bet for doing that is accessing our embodiment, like getting into our bodies, connecting with nature, which is the truth of who we are. I don't remember what you said, but you said something really great about when we look at nature, we come back home to ourselves or something like that because we are nature. Yeah. So it was great. So we come back into resonance. And it literally is what we're talking about here. Our nervous system is an entire network of nerves that go through our entire body. It includes the brain. And our nervous system speaks in electricity. The communication between all the neurons, all the synapses in the brain, everything, it's electric. Our entire bodies are running on electricity. If somebody flatlines, how do we bring them back to life? We shock them with what? Electricity. It is all energetic. That electricity has a frequency, AC/DC, that was like not actually originated. It did not originate as a band. It originated because it's two different kinds of electrical current. And there's way more than two different kinds, but that's just an example that you learn like, I don't know, in 8th grade or something. So when we understand that our bodies are running on electricity, it becomes a lot easier to understand that dysregulation is a frequency and regulation is a frequency. And back to the double binds, when we're in a frequency of dysregulation and fear, and our nervous system is dysregulated and we're in I must, I can't, we're in like either or, we are not we're not like, our radio is not turned to the channel of possibility. And we cannot just decide. So a lot of people in my field will be like, just change the channel. And I'm like, no, you can't do that with your mind, but you can do it with your body.
Mm.
Your body is what changes the channel, because your body is like a massive radio receiver. It's like an antenna. And so that's where we can get into, and it sounds like even just the act, and I don't know if you actually did this in the moment, but it was a great metaphor. Even just the act of opening a palm
Mm.
could be a way to find another possibility, because it's just representing openness. It could be swaying back and forth. It could be, you taught me lower back rib breathing. I mean, there's like a million different ways to access safety, but the name of the game is, if I'm in a double bind, I just don't feel safe. And so I need to find a way to signal to my body that I'm safe, and then trust that an idea will come through that actually is that sacred third, that is a win, 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 win.
I'm loving this for so many reasons. One is that you didn't give us your actual, like, you didn't say, like, so this was the sacred third. What you said instead, and you did, you like didn't and you did. And what I feel like what you said instead and highlighted, which feels so important and so much more beautiful than saying, so this is the third way out. Like, this is was just talking about the importance of coming back to your body, which can be hard when you're dysregulated. So in the 3 directions map, to bring that map up one more time, which we went over with your group in December, double binds is the second direction. It's looping. Um, and so as we create conditions, which we can do slowly over time, then new ways of being. And so it sounds like you didn't just have like, well, then I'm going to do this with my business, and this will be my sacred, like my sacred third, where my body and my, like, but that actually, it was a slow process of a lot of
Yes.
little changes of being with your body and going out and looking to the ocean. So I love that, because instead of someone listening to this and thinking like, okay, I must find the sacred third now, it's the permission to know that it's going to happen, so that it could happen slowly over time, and that the process may not be an idea that you can come up with right away. The other thing you said was so brilliant. It's Bridget who does the fists. And sometimes when I'm trying to come up with examples, I do it with my hands. And I used to teach a lot of emotional anatomy. And I remember I would have my students make fists with their hands and then flex their wrists and watch what happened to their breath.
Mm.
Just by having the fist closed, it does actually change our state a little bit. And by opening the palm, as you said, I'm not sure I realized that. Like, as Bridget did it, I just realized it like helped my brain think differently. But I'm like, oh yeah, there is actually a physiological response to opening a palm and then to open the other palm. You think about there's so much reason why we pray in certain ways and we do certain movements. It actually, every single movement changes our physiology. And so what she'll do as she's thinking them out, it's like she'll have all those statements like, this is true, although, or and you start kind of, yeah, like swaying back and forth until you just see, like you said, so many options. And I loved also what you said, something around like, um, nuance requires, I'm gonna say
Regulation.
regulation. Okay. I was gonna say nuance requires resonance.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Yeah. So beautiful. It's
Yeah.
very accurate.
It's on a different radio station.
And I also love that, because I've heard so much about like just tune your radio station, and that gets to be a practice over time of changing within our body, so
Yeah.
that it just the end of that 3 direction map is that the thing that activated you at the beginning can become extinct. Meaning
Mm.
it could happen and you're like, "Oh, I thought I healed that pattern," and it's okay if, like, it's a lifetime thing, but a lot of times you forget that that was even a thing.
Yes.
That's like when you're now listening to a new radio station and you forget that you ever tuned into this other belief system or other way of being, because
Yeah.
the thing that seemed impossible feels true. And the one more thing I wanna say about that is that the earlier on the timeline a certain reality was presented as true, the more impossible a new way can feel, which is the beauty of asking and looking for examples where someone survived a new way. And I'm just feeling like, oh, I'm talking more during this interview than I
This
meant
is
to.
great. It's so So good. Okay, so I'm so glad you are, because for those listening, like, I want them to know the depth of knowledge and transmission that actually happens within Relaxed Money, not only from the modules that I teach, but also from you being part of the program. It's like I took 3 pages of notes as we were doing this because I learned so much from you about our physiology, about our energetics, about the nervous system. And so having that within our program and within our community is such an incredible gift, because I do think that we can practice things. It's like one thing to practice things experientially, but for myself, and I think for our students, there's such a deep uh, gift in also understanding why it's working. Like, I think it works better to practice it when we understand why, at least to some degree. And so I really appreciate how you bring it in and how you educate on that, because it's one thing to just like teach a practice, but it's another thing to really understand in depth why it works. And I think it helps it to land much more deeply. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm grateful for everything that you shared today. It was so
Thank you.
like interesting and amazing, and helped me understand life better.
Yeah. And so what I'd love to say for listeners now too is that um I had Kate on because I wanted to talk about this threshold because it's been such a huge thing and I see her thriving. And the card that I pulled for our talk was After the Storm.
Oh,
And it's this owl, and I can think of an owl as like wise and one that has great vision, can see like really far and big, but also like really specific. And it's holding up, I forget what this is, it the Makaba?
oh yeah.
It's like a sign that I often see when my eyes are closed. But I think, something that I can highlight is being able to like watch you in real life, the joy that you have, the friendships you've created, the way in which you really like you and Mike like actually sit down every Friday. I've gotten to like
We did it
eavesdrop
this morning.
before every Friday and really talk about the things. And what we haven't talked about too much here yet is there's so much practical monetary ideas too, because you have been running a business for probably 20 years now? I was gonna say 10, but
Nope, it's
graduated like
20
20.
for sure. It's
Yeah,
closer to 22.
yeah, 22, okay.
Mhm.
So you're really good at this, and money, and the practical, and it used to be your first book was like the practical and mindset, and now I feel like there's cyclical living and nervous system included. And so I am now an affiliate for this program, and I was wondering, I wanted Kate to come on so you could hear from Kate. And the only reason why I said yes to this is because I've gotten to be in the program now for 6 or 7 months. So I get to see how engaged the participants are and how many changes they're making and how authentic they are and how dedicated they are. And like you said, when you surround yourself with other people doing the work, and the community conversation where I'm like, "Oh, this is something I can really get on board with," and also that I'm, I actually am on board because I meet with everyone once a month, and it's so great.
Yeah,
Um, so, do you wanna say anything about the launch? Were we supposed to go anywhere else
yeah.
on that? Do you wanna say anything about the doors opening or what the program is?
I'll just do a super quick, which is that this program is the most holistic financial healing program in existence, because it combines the nervous system aspects, the energetics, the spiritual, the beliefs, the emotions, the mindset, and the practical. And not just the practical from the perspective of like, here's how to manage your cash flow. By the way, we have an amazing system for that. But also like, here's how to make more money. And here's how to make more money in ways that aren't trading hours for dollars. And here's how to actually get that money working for you. So it's like really meets you on all the possible levels of healing. It's not just a personal finance course. It's not just a nervous system healing. It's not just a money mindset or just a money energetics. A lot of what I see out there is just one of those things. Listen, any of those ingredients are phenomenal. But putting them all together really accelerates growth or deepens the growth.
Mm.
And so I teach it over 13 live modules. I think there's a real benefit of being live. They are obviously also on replay, but if folks can be in that container live, even if they're listening to the replays, there's something about the co-regulation and being able to attune your nervous system to the nervous system of the group collective and being in this environment where everyone is committed to safety first and then also expansion. And then I have a tone in my system, which is that I know absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt that anybody can create anything they want. And no one could convince me otherwise about themselves. And so being in space with someone who knows that about you is powerful. So it's like the content and then also that. And then you offer monthly nervous system healing and practice calls. And then I do monthly group coaching as well. And so that happens during the whole year if people choose to participate in that. And I am doing a free 3-day workshop called Wide Receiver for people who want to step into the work and get those first steps going to take their financial healing to the next level. So if you are a financial avoider, if you are just really wanting to up level, our ideal student is someone who wants the degree to which they feel powerful on the inside with money to match the degree to which they appear powerful with money on the outside, so that the inner begins to match the outer. So I would love to meet any of your people, and I'm sure you'll have your link in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll have a link in the show notes. I wanted to add this, which is I haven't missed one of your 3-day calls yet. And the way that I see this, whether it's that you get monthly calls once you're in the program, or you just listen to the 3-day call that Kate's going to do, which is free, just like this podcast is free. Like you can just do this portion. But I'm saying like if you have the ability to do the 3-day, the reason why I do it over and over again, it reminds me of the reason why someone might go to church every Sunday. You're not hearing a new story. Like every Sunday, they don't start reading a new book. Like you're hearing the same story, but you're like going to hear it from a slightly different angle. You're a slightly different person. It's like the idea of stepping into a river and it's never quite the same. But it's this layering for me of repetition of putting myself in a place where a new possibility is being shown. And so I always log on. Plus, I think you're an awesome presenter. I'm like, whoa, the way, like, sometimes I think it's very hard to describe nervous system stuff. And the way that you describe things, sometimes I'm like, wow, that was incredible and so succinct. That's wow. So I just think you're really easy to learn from. And I love, like, I almost came to tears when you talked about the way that you hold a tone of what you believe is possible. You've done that for me. And so, of course, you're looking at me as we're doing this and you were talking about everybody. I'm like, she does. It's true. And so the link will be here if you sign up for it. And if you end up signing up through my link, I'm offering people 2. I was like, was I going to say 1 or 2? I'm saying 2. Woo! Wait, I can, yep, 2. I'm offering 2 privates. So if
Wow,
you
that's
end up
amazing.
signing up for Relaxed Money after the free 3 through my link, I will add 2
Great.
privates. So if you think about having the monthly support from Kate and from me, and then at some point along the line, if you're feeling like something is a little unsure and you'd like some extra support, then we could go in for a one-on-one.
So great. So great. Love that. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for coming
So
on.
good.
And thank you all for listening. I'll end with a may I. When I notice myself going into an either or, an all or nothing, I must, I can't, may I just recognize my state. May I remember that there is most likely a myriad of ways. And when they're not directly available, may I be open to the next right step, the smallest doable piece. And may that be enough. May I surround myself with people who inspire me, who show me what is possible through lived experience. May I remember that I am nature, and that every time I come into resonance with nature, I get to feel more at home, more of a sense of self and plenty.
Mm.
Thank you.
Mm. Amen.